Previously on Tommy Nation Politics.
Free thinking, innovative, and totally open.
Following through on his threats, Donald Trump vetoed a $740 billion annual defense policy bill, which had passed both houses of Congress with a bipartisan majority. The move sparked stern condemnation in Washington, with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calling it an act of staggering recklessness. While Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell openly urged lawmakers to bypass Trump's veto. The House and the Senate are set to meet on Monday and Tuesday respectively, and are widely expected to garner the two-thirds majority needed to override the president. On Tuesday, he unexpectedly threatened to reject a $900 billion COVID-19 relief package, potentially delaying crucial financial aid for millions of Americans.
Hey guys, this is Tommy with Tommy Nation Politics. How's everyone doing today? Tommy Nation Politics.
Political corruption in the rest of the world. Here in the U.S., it's as old as the country itself. CCTV's Nathan King reports.
The founding fathers of the United States, prominent statesmen of the American Revolution, tried to create a government that would put checks and balances on the excesses of human nature, including corruption. Nearly 250 years later, it hasn't always worked out. The presidency of Civil War hero Ulysses S. Grant was considered one of the most corrupt ever in U.S. history.
Things like patriotism.
Spiro Agnew, President Nixon's vice president, was accused of graft and forced to resign. And more recently, former Representative Jesse Jackson Jr., the son of the civil rights hero, was jailed for illegally spending campaign money on himself.
Accept responsibility for the errors of my ways.
Taking bribes, accepting money they shouldn't be accepting. Some lesser, some more serious, but definitely even at the highest levels of the U.S. government, including Congress, there are recent examples of corrupt practices that are taking place.
One of the reasons that corruption may not be the norm here in Washington, D.C. is that what is considered corruption perhaps in other parts of the world is perfectly legal here in the United States Capitol. We're standing on K Street, the center of a vast lobbying industry where special interest groups accept money from businesses and unions and use it to influence lawmakers. Hundreds of millions of dollars are spent every year in Washington by lobbying firms that often employ former lawmakers. Nearly half of all U.S. members of Congress leave office and become lobbyists, many trying to influence their former colleagues on someone else's behalf. And in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in a case called Citizens United that corporations and unions could spend unlimited amounts of money on election campaigns, either supporting or campaigning against candidates. Recently, the billionaire industrialists, the Koch brothers, announced they intend to raise and spend $900 million for the 2016 election to bankroll conservative candidates. Lesser funded but well-organized unions will back more liberal candidates. These developments have led to a sharp decline in public trust of the US government. When asked whether the government is corrupt, 79% in 2013 said yes, a 20% increase from just 7 years earlier. Since 1964, the number of Americans who believe government is run for interests of a few has skyrocketed from 29% to 79%, and those who think the US government exists just for the benefit of the people has dropped from 64% in 1964 to 19% in 2012.
Right now, there's a major war going on, a war of ideas, a war of ideology between folks who believe that there's legalized corruption in place in our elections in the United States, and those who feel that the First Amendment to the Constitution, the one that gives you the right to speak freely without restriction by the government, that's more important. And really, there's no firm answer right at this point as to where this is going to go in the next few years.
For now, the practice of spending money on elections and spending money to influence lawmakers is considered free speech, not corruption. That makes elections in the US expensive, An estimated $7 billion was spent on the 2012 presidential campaign and congressional races. And while it may be legal, many feel the principle of one man, one vote is drowned out by the influence of unlimited amounts of dollars. Nathan King, CCTV, Washington.
Blagojevich get busted. Read all about it.
The extent of the alleged corruption by Governor Blagojevich stunned even veteran prosecutors like U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald.
The conduct would make Lincoln roll over in his grave.
Blagojevich and his chief of staff, John Harris, are charged with threatening to withhold state funds from a local hospital and a newspaper company if they refuse the governor's demands for favors and campaign contributions. Investigators say Blagojevich was recorded on telephone wiretaps trying to sell President-elect Barack Obama's Illinois Senate seat. Fitzgerald read one of the transcripts to reporters.
I've got this thing, and it's bleeping golden. I'm just not giving it up for bleeping nothing.
Prosecutors say there is no evidence Mr. Obama was aware of the governor's efforts to auction off his Senate seat.
I had no contact with the governor or his office. And so I was not aware of what was happening.
The scandal is the latest involving alleged political corruption. Alaska Senator Ted Stevens was found guilty of lying about gifts he received from an oil services company, including improvements on his home. Stevens lost his re-election bid this year, ending a 40-year career in the Senate. William Jefferson, a congressman from Louisiana, is awaiting trial on charges of bribery and misusing his office. When federal agents raided his home in 2006, they found $90,000 in alleged bribes stashed in a freezer. Jefferson also lost his re-election bid. Alan Lichtman is a presidential historian at American University.
It is usually about money, but it's about something else as well. It's also about what I call the arrogance of power. These politicians think they are above the law, above common morality.
Lichtman says evidence of political corruption in America goes back many years. In the 1860s, just after the U.S. Civil War, during the administration of Ulysses S. Grant, corruption was so widespread that it was called the era of the Great Barbecue because crooked politicians enriched themselves in a country still recovering from conflict. In the 1920s, during Warren Harding's administration, the infamous Teapot Dome scandal led to the conviction of Interior Secretary Albert Fall on charges he accepted bribes to allow access to federal oil lands. The Watergate scandal in the 1970s led to the downfall of President Richard Nixon.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Unfortunately, we have had corruption throughout American history, although it does seem to have reached a high point in recent years.
Despite the history, Americans believe the country is fundamentally moral and are outraged by corruption, Lichtman says.
And we at least now do have a political process that investigates corruption, indicts and convicts even high political figures for corruption. But I have to say, those who are indicted and convicted are probably the tip of the iceberg.
President-elect Obama promised during his campaign to fight corruption and reduce the influence of lobbyists in Washington. Analysts say the Blagojevich scandal makes it even more important for Mr. Obama to keep that promise. Meredith Buell, VOA News, Washington.
For the last few years, I've had this sense that everything I learned as a kid about how America's government works is completely wrong. But I had no idea how bad things actually were until I saw this one graph. Researchers at Princeton University looked at more than 20 years worth of data to answer a pretty simple question. Does the government represent the people? Now, this is what they found. This axis here represents public support for any given idea. On the left, at 0%, are ideas that not a single American wants. On the right, at 100%, are ideas that everyone supports. This axis represents the likelihood of Congress passing a law that reflects any of these ideas, from a 0 to a 100% chance. On this graph, an ideal republic would look like this. If 50% of the public supports an idea, there's a 50% chance of it becoming law. If 80% of us support something, there's an 80% chance. You get the idea. Now, most Americans would probably agree that, with a few exceptions, we should be as close to this ideal as possible. Unfortunately, the way America actually works doesn't even come close. Take an idea that nobody supports, literally nobody, and it has about a 30% chance of becoming federal law. Now, take an incredibly popular idea. The most popular idea this country has ever seen, and there's also about a 30% chance of it becoming law. This means that the number of American voters for or against any idea has no impact on the likelihood that Congress will make it law. Put another way, and I'm just going to quote the Princeton study directly here, the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. So if you've ever felt like your opinion doesn't matter and that the government doesn't really care what you think, well, you're right. But there's a catch. This flat line only accounts for the bottom 90% of income earners in America. Economic elites, business interests, people who can afford lobbyists, they get their own line. Look at how much closer their line is to the ideal. When they want something, the government is much more likely to do it. And when they don't, they have the power to completely block it from happening, no matter how much the rest of the country supports it. They get what they want, and guess who ends up paying for it? We pay for it with the most expensive healthcare in the world. We pay for it with a tax code that's a complete mess. We pay for it with internet that's slower and more expensive, with wasteful spending, a floundering education system, a catastrophic drug war, and 1 in 5 American children born into poverty. Almost every major issue we face as a nation can be traced back to this graph. How does this happen? Well, just follow the money. Right now, it's perfectly legal to buy political influence in America. Here's how it works. Let's say a big bank wants a law that would force taxpayers to bail them out again if they repeat the exact same reckless behavior that crashed the global economy in 2008. Not exactly the most popular idea with the public, and Congress knows that. That should be the end of it. But that's where the money comes in. It's perfectly legal for our bank to hire a team of lobbyists whose entire job is to make sure that the government gives the bank what it wants. Then those lobbyists can track down members of Congress who regulate banks and help raise a ton of money for their re-election campaigns. It's perfectly legal for those lobbyists to offer those same politicians million-dollar jobs at their lobbying firm. Then, those lobbyists can literally write the language of this new bailout law themselves and hand it off to the politician they just buttered up with campaign money and lucrative job offers. And it's perfectly legal for those politicians to take the lobbyist-written language and sneak it through Congress at the last second. So now you've got a law that greatly benefits the banks, and the whole process can start over. This is how a bill becomes a law. A special interest hires some lobbyists, those lobbyists collect campaign contributions, offer jobs, and then write the laws that Congress then passes to help those same special interests. This happens every day on every single issue with politicians of both parties. In the last 5 years alone, the 200 most politically active companies in the United States spent $5.8 billion influencing your government. Those same companies got $4.4 trillion in taxpayer support. And that's trillion, with a T. And that's just the top 200 companies. Never mind every other special interest, every union, every trade association, and every billionaire. Every single one of them can use their money to buy political influence. You know, there's this idea out there that this only became a problem after the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision in 2010. But the data goes back almost 40 years, and the results are clear. Corruption is legal in America. And as long as it is, anyone who can spend money to buy political influence will. The solution here isn't rocket science. Make corruption illegal. We already know Congress won't do it. I mean, one look at this chart will tell you that. What we need is a plan that lets us go around Congress and do what the American people do best. Fix this mess ourselves. Well, good news. We have that plan and it's already working. Now that we've got the problem covered, let us show you how to be part of the solution.
Hey guys, this is Tommy with Tommy Nation Politics. How's everyone doing today?